One of the things I thought about talking about going into the first year is who is your neighbor? You know, I think for us, a lot of times, I mean, that is my favorite picture of Jesus and in the disciples. Now, I know it's not real, but the way I imagine Jesus, I mean, that's the way he'd be in my book. And I'd be his best friend somewhere in that crowd right there. Probably the one standing on the top, you know. But I just love that because it shows community. It shows invitation. It shows you want to be his best friend. Sometimes we picture him so, serious that almost Jesus doesn't even have an identity of just having fun. And he's taking a selfie there. I love that. I think Jesus would take selfies, I'll be honest. I know everyone doesn't think so, but he'd have a phone. He'd have more control than all of us, but he'd still take selfies because it's Jesus. And so, but I like that picture because I think it portrays who our neighbor should be. So this morning we're going to look at a passage where Jesus has a conversation with an expert in the law, and he tries to test him by asking him, who is your neighbor? Who's your neighbor? Well, this may seem like an obvious, answer. I believe the illustration Jesus uses will help us understand who really is our neighbor and new ways in which and how we can love our neighbors. So let's take a look at the passage. It's Luke 10, 25 through 37. This is a story of the Good Samaritan. Many of you are familiar with it, but let's read it. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when they saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed on the other side of the road. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to the inn, took care of him. Then the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said. 'When I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" The expert of the law said, "Well, the one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." If someone asked you, or me, what does God want in a relationship with him? I do think many of us would refer to this passage because it's one of the most famous lines, as far as Jesus says in loving God, and that is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. But if we were asked a second question, what does God want from us in relationship to people, to our neighbor? I think whether you believe in God or not, most of us would agree to love him or her and to help him or her. But now let's get a little more personal by asking, do you love God? Now that could be a bit more difficult. But I think most of us, including myself, would say yes. Deep down inside, I do love God. You probably do love God. I mean, you're here today. But on the surface, there's little to prove me or you wrong, right? In that statement, because it's internal and it's intensely personal. And it's between God and you. But what if we asked a fourth question? Do you love your neighbor? Do you love your neighbor? Now that could be the most difficult of all, because we would say, well, who's my neighbor to begin with, right? Who are we talking about? And that depends on who that neighbor is, maybe. But this is the point Jesus is trying to make. And to take each one of us by pushing us out of our comfort and forcing us to see our heart, which often sets conditions and rules and regulations with people, where we look at God and Jesus and his love is absolutely limitless. So this is where our story begins. As a young Jewish lawyer, a theologian comes to question Jesus. He isn't asking for information, I don't think. And I don't think he's looking, to learn something. I think what he wants to do is increase his reputation in front of the crowd, show people how smart he is, and trap this Galilean, this peasant Galilean, because Jesus really didn't have a title then, and in his words, because they hear about Jesus and how smart he is. And so here he's thinking he's going to entrap him. I think this whole conversation he already previously mapped out, probably in his notebook at home. And he knows how it's going to begin and how Jesus will answer and how he's going to reply. In his mind, it won't be long before he has this Jesus in kind of a intellectual checkmate. That's what he's looking to do. But the young lawyer begins the conversation with one of the greatest questions that men and women have ever faced. Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? Everyone asks that at some point or another in their life, or is there an eternal life? Everyone looks and dialogues with that. And I admire Jesus' restraint in this moment, because he doesn't say to the guy, well, that's a ridiculous question. Because if you look at the way he asked the question, you don't have to do anything, right? Because an inheritance, you don't do anything for. You receive it. Person dies, they will it to someone, and they receive it. But Jesus didn't say that, because he knows the guy's need. He knows where he's at. He bypasses that. And he says, you're a lawyer. You know the Old Testament. What do you think it teaches? Jesus turns the question back on him. And I think this man was deeply discouraged with Jesus. I don't think he liked his response. Here he had come hoping for a theological debate, a dialogue, a good dialogue, and Jesus was treating him like an infant or a first grader who doesn't even know the law. Why? Because just about anyone during that time who grew up in that era with the Jewish people knew the answer to that question. Everyone did. The answer is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Everyone knew that. And Jesus said, good answer. Keep doing that and you'll live. But let's just take a pause for a moment and ask how many times we have been in a conversation that's gotten heated. Anybody married? I'm married, I'll admit it, and it's gotten heated at times. How many got kids? Siblings? Right? We all know conversations with someone sooner or later, you're going to feel the heat. But the thing is that happens so often in these times is we're calculating our answers and the responses, not even listening to the person, just trying to win the argument. I'm sure you've never done that. I have. We often default to debates and facts, arguments, and we begin turning words into weapons. It's sad. We even know we're doing it. We know we do it, but it's what we do sometimes. We no longer seek to restore the relationship, which is the goal in any conflict, but we often just seek to win. We just want to win. Many of us often fail to see the person, and the only thing we see is the argument. Jesus asks us to question the questions that penetrate our hearts, and they force us to see our condition, not the condition of our neighbor, right? Because we're just trying to win the argument, so we're just thinking about the next thing to say. When Jesus asks a question, it's for us. It's to see us, not them, not our spouse, not to try to win. It's to see ourselves. But seeking to justify himself, the lawyer said, well, who is my neighbor? He's continuing the conversation with Jesus. He wanted a definition of terms. He wanted the boundaries that can include and exclude who his neighbor was. What's amazing is he's implying there are non-neighbors, right? That's what he's implying. There's non-neighbors. Like, who does that? But he's doing it. Now, I think we can relate to this. Why? Because many of us at times, we do come face to face with a need with our neighbor. But instead of listening or doing something about it, we get a discussion group started. Hey, let's start this group and talk about this need. And if we can talk about it long enough, maybe we can bend the Bible to fit our lives rather than fit our lives to the Bible. This is the attitude in which the lawyer actually is asking this question, who is my neighbor? So let's be honest in here. Sometimes our neighbor might be that person, right, who calls us at 10 p.m. at night to install their microwave. Okay, that's not my neighbor. That's actually my father-in-law, okay? He's not here right now. He'll probably be here in the next service. He did that. I'm like, who calls you at 10 o'clock at night to install a microwave? But he's also my neighbor, so I'll admit that too. He actually is my neighbor. So we have people. Who's our neighbor? Well, I was at God's Garage when we were down on Washington, and I had this black car that had God's Garage wrapped on it. Some of you may remember that. And it was kind of a matted black, and it wasn't really dirty. It really wasn't that bad. But I'm just at the garage, and this 15-year-old kid comes walking up, and he's got a rag. It's either a rag or a sponge, and a spray bottle. Now, in talking to him, I could tell he was mentally disabled a little bit. And he wanted to wash my car. He goes, for $5, I'll wash your car. I'm like, okay, that's a pretty good deal. I'm like, you can wash my car. So I'm just kind of in the garage watching, and he takes that squirt bottle. I don't know what's in it. He just sprays my car and then wipes the sponge on it. Wipes the whole car like that. And then if you take a black car, it's got a little dirt on it and a sponge. You following me? You're following me. That's right. And you just go like this to the whole car without doing anything else. What's it going to look like? Yeah. It's exactly how it looked. He comes and gets me, and he's like, sir, I finished. I'm like, wow, my car has never looked so great, man. I go, you did such a great job. I go, I'm going to give you 20. My car has never been like that before. That's not lying, right? I am not lying. I gave him the 20. He's my neighbor. He just shows up right across my path. I didn't have to do a thing. He's my neighbor. But when Jesus answers the question, he doesn't give a long theological discourse. He actually just begins to tell a story. And this is where the tension lies in us as much as the neighbor of who really is my neighbor. People who refuse to forgive me, or I refuse to forgive, right? They're my neighbor. People who think differently than you and me, they're our neighbors. People who believe different than you or I, they're our neighbors. People who live differently, they're our neighbors. So we can easily dismiss this by quickly saying, well, everyone's my neighbor. But the reality is we don't even realize our personal judgment, including me, that we may hold until we actually encounter that person, and then we can feel it. But that becomes my neighbor. You see, in this story, Jesus is setting a trap for us. and for the lawyer. Maybe you've read this story many, many times. Maybe it's the first time you've actually heard it. But suddenly, the words come alive and you see it. It's like shrapnel inside your soul. And every so often that happens, that when you're reading the Bible, you pick it up and it's kind of like black print, right, on white pages, telling stories of a place long apart, long ago, far, far away, you know. That's what it feels like. But then there are moments when you're reading it that the text and the print seem to disappear. And on that page, you see your reflection. It's you. It's me. It's personal. Now it's about me. And that's what Jesus is doing. So he tells the story of the Good Samaritan, the man going from Jerusalem to Jericho, about 18 miles, who gets robbed, stripped of everything, beat up, left for dead. But a Samaritan stops to help him. And at the end of the story, Jesus says, of these three, who is the neighbor? The one who showed mercy. And he says, go and do likewise. From that familiar story, Jesus gives the answer to the question, who is my neighbor? But it's important to realize that in answering the question, Jesus took the man out of his world and comfort zone and security and took him into a world and a place where he had placed judgments and conditions on who the neighbor was. If we're going to answer and get an answer to this for us today, here and now, we must be willing to see ourselves clearly, right? Honestly, and the boundaries we create. We have to be prepared to be uncomfortable and hear what God is saying to you and to me. About, maybe 3-4 weeks ago, it was a little further back than that, I had coffee with this young high school guy from Bonneville. He asked me to, we're just having coffee at Starbucks, chilling, talking, and, I'll be honest, like when I'm talking, I don't always pay attention to what's being said. I mean, that's just, I know it comes as a surprise to most of you, but details kind of go over me sometimes. So I'm talking, and at the end of the discussion, the kid's like, hey, would you speak at this thing for me at Bonneville? I'm like, heck yeah, man, I don't mind. Sounds like 20, 30 people, small group kind of thing. I'm like, I'm all good. Like, I'll go there in like 15, 20 minutes. I'm like, dude, I don't even know to prepare. I'll just go and have a good time. Just tell stories. That's what I was thinking. So about 3 weeks ago, I show up to Bonneville, and I'm like in my jeans and my Love Gives hoodie and all excited to kind of talk in this small group, and I'm kind of looking where this place is. And like I said, I wasn't really paying attention other than I heard of Bonneville and heard the right time, And that was important. But there was a lot more important things. So I show up, and then it turns out it's the induction of the National Honor Society, okay? The only thing I ever got an A in was like PE, athletics. I'm like, you got the wrong pastor, man. That would be Roy. That's not me, And they're all in ties, okay? And I'm just sitting like in a hoodie. I'm like, oh, crap. I'm like, I definitely didn't pay attention. And I'm on the front row, and I'm the keynote speaker. I open the program. I'm like, are you kidding me? I've got to do better. Now, it turned out pretty good, I think. I mean, you'll have to ask them. Okay, it was and above all, to get this, it's in the auditorium. So it's not like 30 people. It's like the whole school, of all these people getting inducted into this honor society. And I love it because, I'm not familiar with that group, I'll be honest, as much. They're not my neighbor necessarily, but they became my neighbor in that moment. And it was awesome, and God showed up. But that's what he does. He puts us in the reality of places like that to do something great sometimes when we don't even expect it or even pay attention. That's me. God's like, he's not going to pay attention. He's just going to show up. I know him. And that's what I did. But this is how it often works. Let's say you and I are driving down the road. And we're in a car together. It's making strange noises, and then all of a sudden it comes to a halt. We don't have the tools or even skills to fix it. I know I don't. I know at God's Garage, which I go every Thursday, and when I put on gloves, literally, one of the guys, Doug, he's like, what are you working on? I'm like, toilets. I go over to the bathroom and clean the toilets. I mean, I'm not touching the car. They don't want me touching the car. So I know I don't have the skills to fix a car if it breaks down. If you are in that car and it breaks down, we got problems. In that moment, we'll call God's garage, I know. No. In that moment to us, just about everybody coming down the road, right, who's willing to stop and help us qualifies completely as a neighbor. However, let's turn it around. When the other person's car has come to a stop, and we give justifiable reasons as why we can't stop, in some way, aren't we defining our neighbor with all the preciseness of the lawyer and the reasons why we can't help? We are the lawyer then. Now, things are situational, but most of the time, God puts that across our path so we can do something. The people who occupy the center stage here are the priest and the Levite. If a poor guy who was beaten on the road made a list of candidates, okay, during that time of neighbors, well, the priest and the Levite definitely would be at the top of the list. Traditionally, that even before they even leave their home, traditionally during that time, they would even quote the verse, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. So those guys probably quoted that morning before they even left. They would best qualify, actually, to be the neighbor. But Jesus said the priest came down the road, went on the other side. It's hard to understand how that could even happen. Could one human being see another human being in such desperate need and do nothing for them? Isn't it so interesting that the very laws in which were to help them love and serve their neighbor became the very laws which now stop them from loving and serving the neighbor just because of how they interpreted it? We do get it right sometimes, and honestly, sometimes we don't. It's just the way life is. I was in Haiti a number of years ago, and it was right after earthquake. Sean, who runs our video and media, everything media, was with me, and Roy was too, and we're going down the road. It was after the earthquake. There wasn't much there. It was all broken and bad, and right in the heat of everything, and it was hot. It was in July. It was really hot, and we stopped along the side of the road, and I noticed this guy, their curbs are very deep, and there was water running through it, and I noticed this guy who was extremely poor, probably a street guy, takes his hat and dips it in the water and then dumps it over him because he's so hot. You know what I did? I started taking his photo. I didn't even see him. I blew it. I didn't even buy him water or do anything. I was so interested, right, in capturing the moment and trying to capture that scene. All it is take his photo. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. But God's asking us to see the person, to see him. Let me ask this, are we seeing people? I mean, we say we love people, care for people. What about those who cross our path every day? Are you seeing them? Am I seeing them? Are we distracted, consumed with self, or just too busy to even notice, to help, to smile, to greet? It's easy to see people when we disengage, right, from our current life, and we go and we focus in on serving, because we like to do that, and our church is so good about that. We will disengage and go serve. But this story is not about disengaging. This story is about everyday life. These people were all just doing their life. So when we go overseas, it's so easy to focus in on the needs and see the needs of the people and actually respond to them. But Jesus is saying, what do we do about it today and tomorrow during everyday life? Do we see him? I had a young man come in my office a number of years ago, and he asked me to mentor him. I'm like, what does that even mean? I mean, I don't even know what that means. What does it mean to you to mentor you? Is it just reading books? Is it just me giving you information? I go, so this is what I'm going to do. Next week, I want you to go buy a dozen roses. I want you to hand them out one at a time. And I want you to see people. And I want you to find those who are unloved on the streets and in your community. Because I think God wants us to see him, to notice. It's not a book. It's not information. It's more about doing too. Now, the context about the priest, since the priest was kind of a religious type, I'm sure his reasons for not stopping were religious reasons, right? Back in the Old Testament, it said if a priest touched a dead body or even came within 6 feet of it, depending on who the person was, they're unclean. And they're defiled and they can't do anything. And I could imagine the priest thinking to himself, I'd really like to help today, but it'd just be my luck if that guy just died in my arms. And then I'd have to go and do some cleansing and, it's expensive sacrifices I got to make. And then I'd have to offer it. I just don't want to get involved today. So I think he said this, because I think I say this. Maybe you say this. God, if he's there tomorrow, I'll help. Anybody ever said that? If he's there tomorrow, he's there today, right? But sometimes we're like, I'll make a deal with you, God, tomorrow, I'll stop. God's like, I sent him. About 6 weeks ago, we get a lot of traffic during the week of individuals at Washington Heights who come in during the week and just ask for things, money, different things like that, and we don't have any connection to them, but we're a big church, and so they'll stop here and try their luck in a sense. And we're really patient, and we kind of evaluate the stories and try to be very compassionate. Well, this one guy stopped in about 6 weeks ago. It was right at Thanksgiving, just before. And he's like, I need an engine. And I wasn't here, but Shane, who's our director of finances, was here, was talking to him. He's like, this guy came in, he just says he needs an engine. He just doesn't have money for an engine. I'm like, he needs an engine? Like, did he ask for a place to stay or money? No, he found an engine. He wants to know if we can buy for like $300-400. He'll change out the engine and everything. I go, that's weird. I mean, like, no one comes in and asks for an engine like that. I go, give me his number. Let me call him. So I call him. His name's George. And he's like, yeah, I found the engine at like TerraPart. It's like $300-400. I'll take it out. I just don't have finances. I have my kids and my wife, and we're heading to Texas. My engine currently is like blowing water, and it's just like really bad shape. I can drive it, but it's not going to make it. I'm like, okay, let me meet you. So talked to him a little more, met him down there in the morning to take out the engine. And sure enough, he shows up. I'm like, now, you just want the engine, right? He's like, I just need an engine. Where are you staying? Well, I just need an engine. So he's sleeping in the car with his 2 young kids. I'm like, well, and he didn't even ask. I'm like, you're going to have a hotel while you change your engine. He's like, I want to change it at the church. If you'll let me change in the parking lot. This guy doesn't even know we have a garage. We're probably the only church in Utah that has a garage. So, okay, and he doesn't even know that yet. So I'm just like still filling out the water, like what's going on? God, what are you doing? Trying to listen and everything. And so I get him his engine. He pulls it out like in 3 hours. Then I'm like, okay. I go, this is a trust thing. I don't know you. You don't know me. I go, but you can change this engine at a shop. You have a shop? Like, we have a shop. I go, but you have to do it outside because I still don't know you. But we have all the tools and everything. So we get to the shop. Like, granted, he just pulled out an engine. And now he's got to take out his engine and put in the new engine, too. So we get to the shop. I talk to him a little bit. I'm like, I like this guy. He seems so cool and just good. Like he's just having a hard time. So you can pull it in the shop. And we have some guys. One of our guys helped him change the engine. He's sitting right there on the front row. That guy took the engine out that morning, took his engine out and put the other one in by 5 o'clock, tooted the horn, started the car. Bye, thanks guys so much. I'm like, what just happened? And why is he leaving? He's a really good mechanic, man. He could stay. I'm like, George, you need to come back to Utah, man. I know you're not from here, but he's my neighbor, right? We could have easily turned him away, but he's my neighbor. And so it just turned into something beautiful. We categorize people, right? Us, them, we love to categorize that. You know what I don't like about that? I am them. I know I'm them probably. Every time we use us and them, I'm probably them. But we categorize people. And the largest group of our neighbors are probably those we're indifferent with. So look closely at Jesus' illustration. Look at who he chooses. It wasn't those who go to your church, the people, friends, family, whoever, co-workers. It was an illustration to make the deepest point in each one of us. It was those who we marginalize, judge, and avoid. That's his point. Some of the most marginalized people that we have around here, I think, in the United States. And a lot, they get marginalized and judged and stuff. And last January, we did what's called boxes for brothels. You're like, what the heck is that, you know? Well, Valentine's was coming, right? And there's some people where it's legalized prostitution in Nevada. So as a church, we agreed we would just love them. So those love give boxes about the same size last January. We had everyone fill up the boxes with just all kinds of beautiful, inspirational things, handwritten notes, all kinds of things to say we value you, we love you. And then I took 13 people and we drove across Nevada. It took us 12 hours to get to Reno of all the stops. And we stopped at every brothel, handing them those boxes. I said, Happy Valentine's Day. We love you. We don't want anything. They start crying. I mean, right there is so disturbing, but so awesome to be and see that and be part of that and watch their reaction. Like, we can keep these? Like, these are for us? I'm like, yeah, they're just a gift. And then we put our website on there if they want to watch us. We just want to know you have value and that we love you. So the way I process with things like that is I often write. I like to journal a little because it helps me think it through and kind of capture what I'm feeling. And so I just wrote a paragraph here right after that, and I'll read it to you after that moment when we came out of those brothels. So what makes this so disturbing and dark is the willingness, abusive environment these girls are in, because they're willing, they're in it. Many probably being abused or have been abused, not always violent, but it is willing, but it is also demoralizing and demoralizes their value. And just because it's legal and they are willing doesn't mean it's not devastating, right? I don't pretend to understand their lives or what they've been through or why they even do it. I think in today's world, it's so easy to make general statements about why and they choose that kind of life. But in reality, there are millions of little steps that led them there. And I'll probably never understand the why. But what is more important than the why is the who. Who loves them? Who values them? Who still believes in them? Who knows everything about them and still sees greatness? No different than them. The why is what leads us down so many dark roads. The who is who always brings us back home. We're no different. We're all looking for the who. The who is Jesus. Jesus closes this story and mentions the hero of this story, the third man coming down the road, the Samaritan, that he recognized who his neighbor was. He stopped. He did something. He cared for him. And let me close with this illustration. I got a window here. So, oftentimes I think we kind of see the window like this. You know, we're kind of, I'm going to kneel down looking through it. But what happens is when we look through a window, if there's something on the window, it can distract us, right? And so when we're trying to see our neighbor through the window, sometimes we have political differences that stop us from seeing the person. And we start throwing up walls. Sometimes your hair, the way you look, right? It took a lot to get my hair this way today. It distracts you, right? But the way we look, true? Kind of stops us from actually living and seeing. Time, we're too busy. Skills, I don't have the skill. Shame, emotions get in our way so much that like, I just can't do it. Anxiety, fear, judgments. Biggest thing is, some people don't even want to open the window. They don't even want to open, and they live their life behind the glass. And they're so obsessed sometimes with themselves, they just keep on cleaning the window or seeing what's on it. The difference is Jesus saying, look through the window. Yeah, you got problems. We all got problems. Just kind of talk to me. Try to get rid of it. It may come back, but get rid of it. Look through it. See what I have for you and all those out there. Look through the window. Open it up. So that way you can do life with other people and not stay in a house or in some closed door. You got to see beyond it. Don't be so obsessed with whatever you're going through or whatever you're worried about. We all have our issues. Look through the window so we can see our neighbors and enjoy them and love them. Big idea. Your neighbor is not who lives next to you, right? Your neighbor is all those who cross your path on a regular basis, every day, every moment. God's sending them. They're across your path. They're not mine. Notice them. See them. See them and see through the window. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you so much for this morning, for the opportunity to be here today, for your grace, your mercy in our life, for you continually working with us behind the scenes and the things we don't even see you doing. You're so good to us, God. May we just continually see your goodness so much that we see you first, us second, and that we could start living, seeing through the window, our neighbors, touching new lives this year as you've made us to do it. So Lord, be with us, keep us safe. And Lord, thank you for all that you've done. In Jesus' name, amen.